Well, this month we're going to take a look at a Japanese internment as a consequence of the bombing of Pearl Harbor and Executive Order 9066. So I want to start out by asking you to think about, what does internment mean? Is it like jail, incarceration? Is it like a concentration camp? Why would a government create camps in the first place? The Spanish camps of 1896 on Cuba, concentration camps, and the Anglo-Boer War in 1899. The Japanese had prisoner of war camps, 7 groups of them. And then, of course, we know about the German concentration camps. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, President Roosevelt felt he needed to do something to keep the west coast of the United States safe and secure from any treasonous activity. The incarceration of all Japanese persons or persons of Japanese descent was seen as one way to keep the nation secure, and he took care of this with Executive Order 9066. Here's a definition, an overview from the Britannia, Encyclopedia Britannia. A concentration camp or internment camp, a center for political prisoners and members of national or minority groups who are confined for reasons of state security, exploitation, or punishment, usually by executive decree or military order. Persons are placed in such camps often on the basis of identification with a particular ethnic or political group, rather than as individuals and without the benefit either of indictment or a fair trial. Concentration camps are to be distinguished from prisons, interning persons lawfully convicted of civil crimes, and to be distinguished from prisoner of war camps, in which captured military personnel are held under the laws of war. They're also to be distinguished from refugee camps or detention and relocation centers for the temporary accommodation of large numbers of displaced persons. Now, after the attack on Pearl Harbor from December the 7th, 1941, President Roosevelt on February the 19th, 1942, either felt or was persuaded to remove persons of Japanese descent from the West Coast. Fear of invasion and of the potential for allegiance to change from the United States to the Empire of Japan were reasons cited for FDR's Executive Order 9066. The responsibility to carry out Executive Order 9066 was put under the Army and the Wartime Civil Control Administration, while people of Japanese ancestry were required to leave the coast from Washington all the way through California. One question that arose was, why didn't Japanese from Hawaii have to be removed? After all, they were not only closer to Japan, Hawaii was the specific location that the attack had happened in the first place. Now, from the beginning, there were questions about the president's right to deny civil rights guaranteed by the Constitution to U.S. citizens. Japanese residents of the U.S. fell into 2 categories: the Issei, Japanese immigrants, and the Nisei, who were children of the Issei, who were legal citizens because they were born on American soil, according to the 14th Amendment. Did the president have the authority to jail American citizens solely based on their race? Note the dates here on the poster. The date of the instructions, the date they would be able to get more instructions. What would you take in a single suitcase? What if you were still the parent of a child? What do you suppose you were not allowed to take? And what do you suppose happened to all the stuff you left behind? Property, perhaps real estate property. Property like cars, refrigerators, household goods. Now, the climate of fear and racism didn't just pop up after Pearl Harbor. It had been growing for more than half a century. Beginning with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1898, the Gentleman's Agreement then between Japan and the United States in which Japan agreed not to send common laborers over, but only people classified in essentially professional groups, teachers, doctors, people that the U.S. Government felt that the economy needed. And it continued through the Immigration Act of 1924, which restricted immigration after the 19th century, if you can get here, you can come here attitude. The Immigration Act of 1924 limited immigration based upon either ethnicity or country of origin. The official policy of the United States was to eliminate immigration from all countries in the Far East and specifically China, but including Japan. In the Gentleman's Agreement between the U.S. and Japan, as I stated, Japan agreed not to issue passports to the U.S. except in those certain categories. President Teddy Roosevelt agreed to urge the city of San Francisco to rescind the order requiring Japanese students who were segregated from white students in school. In the Jim Crow era, of course, there were schools for colored and schools for white, and the Japanese students had been attending the non-white schools. And so that was part of President Teddy Roosevelt's agreement, was to encourage San Francisco to stop that stuff. Now, the first stop in the deportation to permanent camps was to assembly centers. The closest to us here in Corona was at Pomona. Also close to us was the Santa Anita racetrack. Fairgrounds and racetracks were the first choice because they had accommodations built in. Those accommodations were horse stalls used for the event center. If you can just think about this, on Monday, horses were in the stall, and on Tuesday, when the Japanese Americans showed up, they would put people inside those same stalls. This happened, generally speaking, May, June, July. So as you can, if you've been on a farm or visited a farm or been in the horse stall or rented a horse, then you know that as the heat gets up, the smell from the horses get putrid. In this photo right here, which is from the Pomona Progress Bulletin, you can see the temporary structures at the LA County Fair that they also added to the stalls to accommodate the fast influx of Japanese citizens. And you can see in the picture here the materials stacked up for the building of what was essentially military-style barracks. Now, the internees tried to make the best of what everyone knew was a bad situation, mostly coordinated by the Nisei, those were the American citizens who, according to the 14th Amendment, were citizens because they were born here in the States. Each assembly center and then each camp had a newsletter that was mimeographed and was published on site. These newsletters contained official news, information about activities, and the nuts and bolts of living on the premises and other American activities that were common in society. The newsletter was closely censored, and in this case, this particular newsletter was censored by the editor of the Pomona News, the public newspaper. The essay here was written by a 16-year-old student who was interned at Pomona, and as you can see here, her name is Mei Haruchi, or something close to that. This was done for, if you go to the bottom, the editor was written for a student contest. She was 16 years old. This was a contest for Memorial Day. And you can see here, today, May the 17th, 1942, throughout the United States, will be observed throughout the United States as I Am an American Day. Let us all join the 130 million patriotic Americans who, for the last 2 years, have observed this day. The fact that this nation is at war with Japan should not shake our loyalty to the United States. In this celebration, citizens of every race will take part, but we, the Niseis, in the various scattered centers will be standing apart. We've been taught that Americanism results on the fundamentals of freedom, tolerance, equality, equal opportunity, and patriotism. These are bright, shining emblems, and in our faith, let us refuse to believe that the clouds passing over these emblems for us now will always darken our days. We know that the many Niseis that are called to armed services and those that are volunteering freely and willingly in reception center work must hold to that faith. For with that belief, we can truly be glad that we are a part of America and may lift our heads and our hearts and proclaim, even in our separation, I am an American with 130 million others. Americanism means vigilance of rights to liberty and freedom. Let us prepare ourselves to be ready when the time comes to defend and uphold for the sake of America herself the principles on which she has built a nation. Once again, this is from a 16-year-old who participated in an essay contest at the school that was inside the Assembly Center. Now, they weren't at the Assembly Centers very long, about 2 months or so, and then they were loaded on trains and sent to the permanent centers on the other side of the Sierra Nevada mountains, also in Colorado and in Arkansas. And here's an article, once again, from the Pomona Valley News, and you can see in the center there that they expected about 4,200 people completely. There was some artwork, some drawn artwork in the Pomona Center News. So here's a couple of line drawings done by the staff. On the right side is the way the bathrooms were constructed. You can see it's pretty obvious here that any kind of privacy to take care of your private business was non-existent. On the left side, though, you can see how the internees tried to make good of a bad situation, and you can see the division of the stalls and a little more detail there. This collage represents the mess hall steps, and then inside, gathering around the family dinner table was effectively lost during the camp, like you might do at home. The internees complained about the food when they arrived because the Army cooks made American food. The administrator worked with the internees and the chef to make the meals, that were more closely resembled traditional Japanese food. Some internees reported it wasn't that bad when you consider it was made by the Americans. This last photo here was taken on April of 2017. It's on the approach to the camp on the little side road there. The irony of the plaque honoring World War II vets and the guard tower in the background speak to the opposite realities of the war. As the war continued, the federal government asked for young internees to volunteer. They had to pass a loyalty oath to be admitted. The 442nd Infantry Regiment, comprised of all Japanese Americans, served with distinction as the United States island hopped from the Pacific Ocean toward Japan. Here's a copy of the location of the camps that they pass out at Manzanar. You will see that while an overwhelming majority are here on the West Coast, there's a couple. Here's Jerome, Arkansas. The Jerome camp also saw some prisoners of war from Italy and Germany. And here's the rower, and then here's a couple over here also. Our folks that we had looked in on before from San Jose ended up here in Heart Mountain. They didn't go to Manzanar, so they went from Pomona right over here up to Heart Mountain, which is in Wyoming. Here's this is also from the National Park Service over at Manzanar. Here's just a real quick look of the distribution of the Japanese population in the United States in 1940. And you can see that while there are a smattering on the East Coast, probably just some family groups. You can see that overwhelmingly the West Coast was the preferred location for immigrants who had come from Japan, and then of course the families they built. There was, as I stated before, there was some question about whether or not the president actually had the authority to incarcerate massive amounts of people only based upon their ethnicity. Fred Korematsu, who was 23 years old, decided that he would not comply with the letter to the requirement to evacuate. His folks went, but he decided not to, and he actually went to a surgeon and had some minor surgery done on his eyes to make him look a little more round, and he changed his name, saying that he was of Spanish and Hawaiian descent. He was caught, though, on May the 30th, 1942, which was about 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The FBI arrested him for failure to report to a relocation center. After his arrest, while waiting in jail, he decided to allow the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, to represent him and make his case a test case to challenge the constitutionality of the government's order. Korematsu was tried in federal court in San Francisco. He was convicted there of violating military orders issued through Executive Order 9066, given 5 years on probation and sent to an assembly center in San Bruno, which is up there in the Bay Area. Korematsu's attorneys then appealed the trial and the court's decision, and it went to the U.S. Court of Appeals, which agreed with the lower court that he had violated military orders. Korematsu then asked the Supreme Court to hear his case. You'll recall just a moment ago I mentioned that it was a test case, and so this progress up the line of court cases was no surprise to anybody. It was expected to happen, and of course they were looking for it to be declared unconstitutional. So then on December the 18th, 1944, a divided Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 decision that the detention was a military necessity and that it was not based on race. Not all justices, though, agreed with the majority. And Justice Murphy, one of the justices on the court, expressed the following opinion. I join in the opinion of the court, but I am of the view that detention and relocation centers of persons of Japanese ancestry, regardless of loyalty, is not only unauthorized by Congress or the executive, but is another example of the unconstitutional resort to racism inherent in the entire evacuation program. As stated more fully in my dissenting opinion in Fred Toyosabaru Korematsu versus the United States, racial discrimination of this nature bears no reasonable relation to military necessity and is utterly foreign to the ideals and traditions of the American people. I have no doubt that, like Abraham Lincoln, he was looking at the Declaration of Independence and other American documents. So we're going to fast forward here. 1944, Korematsu versus the United States. As I stated, it was decided that he was guilty and that the government had a right to do that. So now we're going to fast forward to 1983, and the president is Ronald Reagan. In 1983, a pro bono legal team, pro bono is a legal term which means they did it for free, with some new evidence, filed a petition. I think you say this Latin word coram nobis, but I don't really speak Latin, so I'm just taking my best shot. They filed a petition and they reopened the 40-year-old case in the federal district court on the basis that of egregious or over the top and not justified government misconduct and falsifying the record on military necessity. The young lawyers who brought the case, they were mostly Japanese American, showed that the government's legal team had intentionally suppressed or destroyed evidence from government intelligence agencies, and that evidence reported that Japanese Americans posed no military threat to the United States. The official reports, including those from the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover, were not presented in court. And on November the 10th, 1983, federal judge Marilyn Hall Patel overturned Korematsu's conviction in the same San Francisco courthouse where he had been convicted as a young man. And yes, he was still alive and he was there. In fact, Mr. Korematsu just passed away a couple of years ago. So, was it a mistake to eliminate civil liberties and rights of Americans based solely on race? Did we have the authority? Does the Constitution give us the power to look at a person's race and incarcerate them without any evidence, without any court, without any trial? Well, this came from the National Archives. In 1988, Congress passed and President Reagan signed Public Law 100-383, also known as the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, and it acknowledged the injustice of internment, apologizing for it. Not only did the government apologize, it provided a cash payment of $20,000 to each and every person who was still alive, who was incarcerated. One of the most stunning ironies in this episode of denied civil liberties was articulated by an internee when told that Japanese Americans were put in camps for their own protection. He said, "If we were put there for our own protection, why were the guns in the guard towers pointed inward instead of outward?" So we've taken a look at this. Once again, the news is kind of directing what I talk about here, and there's talk of a mass deportation of potential immigrants, and an article in the New York Times stated that the only way that that could happen would be to create camps to temporarily hold people. And so here we are trying to gain some insight and some knowledge and some guidance perhaps from actions and activities that were taken by the government, by America in the past. And so that was kind of the incentive for this. And it's sorry to say that we have already had this experience, but it's also something to consider as we move forward. I kind of want to end here. I've created a website, historywithdave.org. You can see the code up there in the corner. You can either type it into your browser or just scan it with any mobile device, and the QR code will take you there. You'll find a couple of things there. Let's go over here and take a really quick look. See if it'll take me there. No, it won't do that. You'll find 3 sections there on the website. One is called History with Dave, and that's where you'll find other archived sessions that we've had the last couple of months. You will find Travel with Dave, which is a blog that's about 4 or 5 years old. When I go places and take pictures, history is just something that's in me. And so typically these little missives, these little traveling things will have a little bit of historical background. I started the blog as a combination travel and photo blog. And so you'll pick up little tips and advice about taking photos. You'll see that I have a thing for old film cameras. And if you get kind of lost in this little hole for a while, you'll see that it's not uncommon for me to take out a camera that your parents or even your grandparents used, take it out and take some pictures with it and make some comments about it. So that's called Travel with Dave. And then I've also added a section because I read a lot of history. I'm sure that's no surprise to you. So I've added another section called Read with Dave. I used to edit the newsletter for the California Council for the Social Sciences, and I included a book review in every edition that I did. And so I have a few of those that are, they're going to be about 10 or 12 years old, but a good book never goes out of style. And as I continue to read, I will add to those also. I'll seldom talk about those books here, but if you get over to the webpage and you get interested, or maybe you're looking for something to read, there will be a little something there if you'd like to take a look at it. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our session here. Next month, we're going to take a look at the miracle of the 50s. There's an idea, we see it in the news, and politicians on either side kind of look back to the 50s, the days of Leave It to Beaver and Ozzie and Harriet and the big fins and all the consumerism. And there's this idea that if we could just get back to the 50s where mom stayed home and dad went to work and everything was wonderful, that's how America has been and should be again. But the truth of the 50s is pretty far from that. And so we're going to look at what happened in the 50s, why it was an anomaly. In fact, we'll take a look at some information and some evidence that shows that when that era of the 50s and 60s came to an end, there was a reason why it did. And so, I don't want to give the whole thing away, but so that's what we'll do. We will take a look at the miracle and the myth of the 50s and the post-war boom, and that'll be next month in November. The date, if I remember correctly, is the 24th. So I look forward to seeing you there. And like I said, if you get bored, just scan that QR code and take a look at some other stuff on the website, historywithdave.org. All right, then, I'll see you next month.